I'm Henny B, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Hooked on the podcast? Now you can hold the stories in your hands. World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, Volume 1 is now out on Amazon. 10 unforgettable tales of resilience, loss, and hope from the people forever changed by war. Available in paperback and on Kindle. Today's episode, The Lost Patrol. He tensed and froze in place when a twig snapped beneath his boot. To him and the others, it was as loud as a gunshot. For 3 days, they had crept through the dense Masurian forest in East Prussia, a region already notorious as a tense borderland. The Battle of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes campaign had unfolded here, and now their task was to chart German positions where ambush might wait. They had crossed paths with a few pockets of Germans, small patrols like their own, but so far no concentration of troops. Each time, the 5 Russians melted into the underbrush and held still until the danger passed. That was what they did now. As the silence closed in around them, a German voice rose through the trees, followed by the unmistakable crunch of boots and the sharp crack of twigs snapping underfoot, coming their way. Instinctively, Timofey Alexiev dropped to the ground, and the others followed. Mikhail, Stepan, Yakov, and Nikolai pressed flat against the forest floor. The footsteps and voices grew louder. If there was anything Timofey had learned about the German patrols lately, it was that they were not quiet. They knew the effect they had, that the noise alone was enough to intimidate. Every careless shout, every snapping branch struck fear into the hearts of anyone within earshots. It was no different now. Timofey did not dare breathe. He did not dare look up. He kept his face buried in the dirt. He knew any movement and he was a dead man. They all would be. The Germans were almost on top of them now. He guessed that they were a mere 3 meters away. Was it possible that they could hear his heart slamming within his chest? He felt as if he could, they could. He had been scared before, but this felt different. His skin was crawling, his hair standing on end. He heard a boot strike against something, but there was no reaction. What was that? What had been kicked? He was certain it was not one of his own, because if it had been, there would have been a response. His body tensed further as the footsteps grew closer. The talking had come to a whisper, but he could still hear the unmistakable German tongue and even some light laughter. 5 terrifying minutes later, the patrol finally moved on, and Timofey could allow his body to relax and let out his breath. 3 more minutes passed before anyone in their small patrol had the courage to rise from the prone position they had taken. Timofey was not the first. It was Mikhail, the ranking member of the small squad, that spoke first, but he did so in a whisper. "Coast is clear." He rose quickly and immediately dusted himself off. Unlike the others, he hated being dirty. He glanced around at the other men. All were still tense as they rose to their feet. They all knew that they gave the Germans very little time before they rose to get far away. If they spoke too loud or made too much noise, the Germans would quickly double back and they would be dead men. Timofey noticed then the carcass of a deer just ahead of them, less than a meter away. "That must have been what they kicked," he uttered just loud enough for the rest to hear. Nikolai appeared next to him. "Darn, I was going to eat that too." Timofey, who was now used to Nikolai's jests, quickly yet lightly punched him in the arm. "Sure you were," he quickly quipped back. It was Yakov that spoke next, again in a quiet whisper. "That's six. 6 patrols we've seen in the last 3 days. No huge troop movement, though, which is odd. There must be a unit around here somewhere. Why else would there be patrols?" Nikolai asked. "There for sure is, but I'm not venturing further. 6 patrols is enough to tell us there is a force in these woods somewhere. We're gonna head back to camp and let the colonel know," interjected Mikhail. Mikhail, as the ranking officer, was allowed to make this call, a call that Timofey and the others wished he would have made yesterday after they hid from 2 patrols in a 3-hour period. The early morning dew had developed on the antlers of the dead deer. The deer was riddled with bullet holes, and as Timofey looked around, he noticed that the trees also had holes. There was a battle here, he mused aloud, and recently. This prompted the rest of the men to also look around. They quickly noticed as well. Yakov looked down at his uniform and attempted to clean himself off. The mud smeared into his tunic. He pulled his hands away. It was not mud. He glanced down at where he had lain down. "That's not mud. That's blood." "I wonder if it was one of ours or theirs," Timofey asked, and then added, "Where's the body?" The men were quiet, the question never being answered. "Let's head back," whispered Mikhail, as he started to walk in the opposite direction, back towards the camp. The woods were eerily quiet as they retraced their steps, searching for the small stream that would lead them back to camp. Timofey, being a thinker, was lost in his thoughts as he brought up the rear of the small contingent of men. He thought of home. He was positive most men did this. He had hailed from a small village in Siberia. He, like many young men from his village, as well as neighboring villages, had been excited about the possibility of fighting for the Tsar. When Russia had declared war on Austria-Hungary in defense of Serbia, Timofey had eagerly signed on to the fight. His thoughts took him back to just before he left his small village of Pokrovskoye. He had been summoned before the holy man of the village, a man that was either hated or revered by the villagers. There was no in between. Some villagers thought of the man as a healer, some as a heretic. Timofey didn't always know what to think of the tall bearded man with piercing eyes. He knew the man had been spending a lot of his time lately in the presence of the Tsar and the Tsarina, and was the son of a peasant family. He shifted uncomfortably as the holy man sat across from him in the small, dark, dusty shack. The holy man's beard hung ragged, his robes smelling faintly of incense and sweat. His piercing eyes locked onto Timofey's, unblinking. It was Timofey who broke the deafening silence. "It's dark in here," he quipped, pointing out the obvious. Rasputin kept his eyes focused on Timofey as if he did not hear him. "I like it dark. It calms the spirits around us." "Saints or demons?" Timofey asked. "What?" Rasputin looked as if he was caught off guard by the question. "The spirits you speak of, are they saints or demons?" Timofey asked again, elaborating on the question. "It's not for mortal men to know if the spirits around them are good or bad. Some are here to lead us, others to tempt us," Rasputin returned. "Why am I here, uncle?" Timofey asked. Even though this was his second cousin, it was customary to call elders in one's family uncle. This made Grigory Rasputin smile. Only family would dare question me. He remembered fondly that his uncle had reached across the table and tousled his hair as if he was a child and not an adult preparing to go to war. He pulled his hand back and began. "I hear you have volunteered for the Tsar's army. Is this true?" Timofey, who had always respected his enigmatic and odd uncle, could not lie to him. I have. You know, I advised the Tsar against this war, Rasputin said. Too much blood will be spilled. This will end badly for Russia. But he did not take me seriously. But he will see. You've told me this before, Timofey replied. But I feel I have a duty to the Tsar just as you do when you're protecting their son. That struck home. His uncle often boasted of his closeness to the royal family, of the summons he received to their palaces. His purpose was always the same, to tend to the health of the heir to the Romanov dynasty, young Alexei. That's different, my boy. I am not in danger when I am in the presence of the Tsar. You will be the moment you step onto the front lines. My cousin, your mother, is concerned, his uncle had told him. Although, where it concerns you, the spirits only show me a long road. Where it leads, they do not show me. What are you trying to say, Uncle? Timofey asked. Your mother has tasked me with persuading you to reconsider this action. They sat in silence for a moment, the statement left hanging in the air. Rasputin continued. I know that me relaying this to you is fruitless. If there's one thing that exists in our family, it's the desire to fulfill our commitments. You will go, you will fight, but the spirits will not allow me to see your fate. But I will tell your mother that I tried to stop you. Timofey had been thankful for this revelation, he remembered. Thank you, Uncle, he had said in return. Memories such as that swarmed through his head as they trudged along under the dense canopy of the woods. It took them 4 hours to find the stream, and another 7 hours following it until they reached the clearing where their journey had begun. Since he had been bringing up the rear, Timofey was the last to arrive at the site. Even before he reached them, he saw the other 4 men standing shoulder to shoulder, unmoving, silent, staring ahead. When he edged up beside Mikhail, he saw why. The camp was deserted. The tents still stood, but the fires were long cold. Where is everyone? He asked, mostly to himself. It was Nikolai who answered. We aren't sure. Looks like they've been gone for a while. And they left in a hurry, added Yakov. Look, there's a rabbit over there. They must have been cooking it when they left. That fire's dead cold. I wouldn't eat that, Mikhail muttered. This is not good. Not good at all, said Stepan. At only 17, he was the youngest of the troop, though taller and heavier than the rest. He was usually quiet, steady, and brave. This time, in the rare moment he chose to speak, his voice shook with concern. Let's look around. Let me know if any of you see any signs of what happened, Mikhail ordered. The clearing was wide, and the camp had filled nearly every inch of it. When they had left, 500 men had occupied the site. Now, from what they could tell, not a single one remained. The 5 men sped out to search the camp, and Timofey made his way to the quartermaster tent. This was the tent where extra equipment would be stored. Things such as ammunition, weapons, even clean socks and undergarments. The front of the tent was undone, which in itself was unusual. When he entered, what he saw made his skin crawl. Every shelf was empty, cleaned out. In a panic, he checked the boxes that 3 days ago contained rifles, grenades, and other essential weapons. They, too, were empty. Confused, he made his way out of the tent. The sun was low in the sky now as dusk was giving way to night. The other 4 men had made their way to the center of the camp. They were discussing something he could not hear from his current vantage point. He did not jog. He did not sprint. He ran to them. What did you find? Mikhail asked as he approached them. Out of breath from the brief run, Timofey held his hand up as a signal for the men to give him a moment. They did. The quartermaster tent is cleaned out. No weapons, no ammo, nothing, he began. It's all gone. It was then that Stepan realized something. You guys hear that? They all stood silent, listening. No, Yakov said impatiently. Yeah, there's nothing out there. That's my point. There are no horses. And look around. All the wagons are gone. When I checked the kitchen stores, the food was gone too. But there's no blood anywhere. I don't think there was an attack here, Stepan finished. It was Mikhail who spoke next. I don't think there was an attack either, but something happened and I don't think we should stay here. All 5 men agreed. Remaining in this place of uncertainty felt dangerous. None of them could explain what had happened or where everyone had gone, and fear was beginning to control them. Their senses heightened, their adrenaline surged. There were still useful items that had been left behind in the camp. The 5 men grabbed what they could carry, from tunics and socks left in tents, to salt pork and bread that had been left unopened near long dormant campfires. As they prepared to wander away from the uncertainty that the camp had brought them, it was Nikolai that asked a question that was on everyone's mind. Mikhail, which way do we go? Timofey watched Mikhail's reaction. It was obvious that he was just as uncertain as they were, but as the ranking soldier, the decision was up to him. We head east, towards Russia, Mikhail said at last. Hopefully we'll find someone who knows something, but for now let's just get the hell out of here and find somewhere safe to sleep. It was the voices that woke him. They were not close enough to hear what was being said, but it was clear to Timofey that they weren't speaking Russian. They were speaking German. His eyes adjusted to being awake. It was still dark with a small sliver of light peeking through the tree lines to the east. He noticed Mikhail, laying flat on his stomach, was looking directly at him, a finger pressed to his mouth, begging for silence. His head swiveled and saw that all were in a similar position. All but Stepan, who was still asleep. The night before, the unnerved group of men had found an area that was beset on all sides by trees and heavy brush to stop for the night. They had all agreed that it felt like the safest option for them given the uncertainty of their situation. Had they miscalculated? He lay motionless, afraid even to breathe as the voices drew closer. He glanced quickly at Mikhail when another voice sounded from behind them, this one louder, also in German. It seemed to be calling out. The first voice answered in kind. It became clear then. This was a patrol that had split in two, and they were caught between the groups. After a brief exchange between the Germans, the woods got eerily quiet, except for the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs that marked their movement, getting ever closer. A sound, very close, very loud, came from Stepan. A snore. At once the rustling stopped. Timofey watched as Yakov scurried to his knees and found his weapon. Mikhail did the same as Nikolai covered Stepan's mouth and attempted to wake him. Timofey reached for his rifle, but it was not where he had left it the night before. Panic surged as his head snapped left and right. Where had he put it? Then his eyes caught movement in the brush to his left. His rifle, in the hands of a German officer. Looking up at the officer, Timofey noticed a wry grin on his face. His rifle was in his hands, but he held it loosely across his chest as if it were his own. Mikhail and Yakov had already brought their weapons to bear, their fingers tight on their triggers. Nikolai and a now startled awake Stepan were on their knees too, far from their weapons, and frozen, seemingly too afraid to make a move toward them. The German did not flinch at the actions of these men. He stood smiling at them. Then he lifted his chin and spoke loudly into the slowly brightening morning. More voices answered. From the brush to the left, two more figures emerged, their rifles slung across their shoulders. Behind them came the steady thud of boots and the snap of branches. Within moments, their once safe haven for sleep was surrounded by Germans, more than a dozen, all armed, all watching. None raised a weapon. Instead, they spoke amongst themselves. Timofey's heart was in his throat. He had never been this scared. What were these men saying? Were they discussing orders? It was Mikhail that made the first move. They aren't firing. And in one swift motion, he tossed his weapon aside and linked his hands behind his head. Yakov followed suit, followed by Nikolai and Stepan. Timofey took the hint and reluctantly did the same. To their surprise, the Germans did not move in to capture them. Instead, they erupted in laughter. The Germans had never disarmed them, just motioned for Timofey and the others to follow them, which they felt compelled to do. As they marched in an almost single-file formation, Mikhail pointed out that they were still following the same stream, heading in the same direction as they had intended. These Germans were heading towards Russia. Yakov wondered aloud why, if they were being taken prisoner, why were they not disarmed? None of them could answer this question. However, they all understood that it didn't matter. They were outmanned and outgunned, 2-1 at least. The Germans expressed themselves in deed rather than word, and this confused Timofey even more. They shared water and bread. They even sat with him during periods of rest as if it were the most natural thing in the world. These Germans acted as if they had forgotten the two sides were at war. As they walked, Timofey's mind went back to the shack in Pokrovskoye and his uncle's voice. "That's different, my boy. I'm not in danger when I'm in the presence of the Tsar. You will be the moment you step onto the front lines. My cousin, your mother, is concerned," Rasputin had said. "Although, where it concerns you, the spirits only show me a long road. Where it leads, they do not show me." Rasputin had been dead for 2 years, murdered in Petrograd, but his words walked with Timofey as if the man still walked beside him. The stream had faded long ago, splitting into thin rivulets that disappeared into the earth. In its place, they had been led to a road, and that road was carrying them out of the forest. He broke from his reverie at the sound of engines rumbling, boots grinding into dirt, and orders shouted through the trees. Ahead, the canopy thinned, giving way to what Timofey could only imagine was a clearing. He blinked against the sudden brightness as the road carried them out from beneath the canopy of the forest. On either side, wide fields stretched away, marked by lines of trucks, clusters of horses, and groups of men talking in low voices. The grass and flowers were flattened beneath them, a place that must once have been beautiful. He looked at Mikhail as their German escort vanished into the crowd, leaving the 5 of them standing alone in the middle of the road. They were lost and more confused than before. Timofey could only follow Mikhail and the others as they started down the road, his rifle still shouldered. Halfway through the fields, Stepan stopped. Timofey noticed first and called out, "Stepan, what's wrong?" The others joined him, circling around. "Why are you stopping, soldier?" Mikhail demanded. Stepan said nothing. He only pointed towards the far side of the field where men sat in uniform that stood out against the gray of the Germans. These were khaki, like their own. "Those are Russians!" Yakov exclaimed. Mikhail again led the way as they wove through the throngs of German soldiers and horses. It was odd to all of them that they were completely unmolested by the enemy, In fact, they had been offered bread, coffee, and had even been the recipients of brisk nods from the soldiers as they made their way through. "It's as if we belong here," quipped Nikolai. They pressed on through the crowd until the field opened wider ahead of them. That was when Timofey saw the khaki tunics more clearly. Men seated on the grass, their rifles stacked in neat tripods. Faces came into focus. Familiar faces. It was their camp. Their men. The 5 of them broke into a run, weaving between wagons and supply carts until they were among their comrades. Hands reached out. There were handshakes, embraces, and rough pats on the back. Voices overlapped in disbelief and relief. "You made it." "Thought we'd never see you again." "Where in God's name have you been?" Timofey found himself grinning despite the gnawing question that remained. For the first time in days, the fear that had lived in his chest seemed to loosen. The campfire roared to life as night set in. A day that had started in utter fear and was preceded by uncertainty and confusion had ended in some comfort as they had reunited with their unit. However, Timofey still had not gotten an answer to any of his questions. Why had the camp been abandoned? Why had the Germans that found them not killed them? And more importantly, why were they now consorting with the enemy in this field? He glanced around the fire looking for a familiar face. He found Yuri, a fellow Siberian who hailed from a village not far from his own. They had met many times before in their youth at various markets that had been held in both towns. He took a seat next to Yuri and was handed a piece of salt pork by his friend without sharing a word. Timofey tore at the salt pork with his teeth, the firelight flicking across the circle of tired faces. The food did little to ease the knot in his stomach. He had to know, and maybe Yuri held the answers. "What's going on here? Has something happened? Why are we in this field with Germans?" Timofey asked. Yuri glanced at him, chewing slowly before answering. "You really don't know?" Timofey shook his head. "No, I do not." Yuri took a long pull from his canteen and set it on the ground by his feet. He still held the salt pork in his hand as he began to speak. "Well, there was a revolution back home in January. The Tsar abdicated." Timofey stared at him. "That cannot be true." "Is it true?" Yuri shrugged, his eyes fixed on the fire. "That's not even the end of it. The Bolsheviks took over. I don't know all the details, just rumors really, but one thing isn't a rumor." He spread his arms toward the field, towards the Germans mingling freely with their men. "This war is over, for Russia and for us." The Bolsheviks. They hate everything that has to do with the Tsar, don't they? Yuri took another bite of the salt pork and spoke as he chewed. "Oh, they sure do, with a passion." The words sank heavy in Timofey's chest. For the first time since leaving home, he felt he understood what his uncle's prophecy meant. The war with Germany was over, but another road waited for him in Russia, and he was not just another soldier returning home. He was Rasputin's nephew, the man who had stood beside the Tsar, the healer of young Alexei, a name the Bolsheviks would see as an enemy. He knew then that he could never go home. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. If this episode stayed with you, if it stirred something quiet or left you in stillness, share it, follow the show, leave a rating, help keep these stories alive. Our first collection now lives on Kindle. Search World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, Volume 1 in your Kindle app, and carry these echoes with you. For glimpses behind the curtain and stories between the stories, join me on Instagram at WWIPod_HennyB. And if you'd like to see your name in the credits, become a producer. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/World War I stories and help power the next tale into existence. Thank you for walking back in time with me.